Every economy has got their own problems. Some economies have problems with inflation. China has not. China is growing around 5%, but they got big challenges in the property sectors. On the other hand, the green transition, they invest a lot in that, and that requires a lot of materials. So overall, the demand for our commodities is quite good out of China.
So do you think the green transition in China can make up for that slump in the property market that we've been hearing about?
Not entirely, but they also have grown in infrastructure and other industrials. But the three components, yes.
So you're quite positive about China, relatively?
Yes, I think we shouldn't expect extraordinary growth at this point in time, but there is a good, stable demand for our commodities from China.
And we're talking about the green transition. On the ESG front, in the Pilbara, you're negotiating with traditional landowners. How have those discussions changed since the Juukan Gorge disaster, which I know you were not in charge at that point in time, but how have those discussions perhaps changed?
I mean, it has obviously been very, very difficult to rebuild trust, and it's not for me to say whether trust has been established. That's for the traditional owners. We have done everything we could, and you could say that's not enough, but I really feel we have made a lot of progress, and I'm very grateful for how constructive the traditional owners in the Pilbara has treated us. But it's still challenging for all parties with the level of activities ongoing in the Pilbara to work us through, because we cannot do anything on their land without their permission. So we have to thoroughly work these things through and make sure that we only do things that they're comfortable with.
When it comes to net zero by 2050, you're targeting scope 1 and 2 emissions to be net zero at that point in time. Are you on track to achieve that?
So many companies have got the net zero target in 2050 of zero, but the real differentiator for Rio is we say minus 50 by 2030, and we are actually on track. It was quite bold for us to make that ambition 2.5 years ago, but now we have a whole long list of projects that are in execution, and therefore we have much more confidence for two things: A, that we can achieve the target, and B, that we actually can do it without us costing too much. It costs some money, but there's also some benefits from it. So net, we might be able to do that without tapping into shareholders' money.
Well, I hope I've got these numbers right. So Capex on decarbonisation, you spent $69 million in the half. There was also $46 million on other projects associated with it. How much is that number going to have to rise in order to meet that target?
Your numbers are absolutely correct, taken out of our half-year result. But what you don't see is that we have signed up for billions and billions of dollars in terms of PPAs for underwriting the development of the biggest solar farm in Australia and the biggest onshore wind farm in Australia. That's really where the big commitments are being made. So it doesn't come for free, but it should lead to that we have competitively priced energy and therefore can continue to produce aluminium in Australia.
Can you give us some context around that solar agreement that you've signed up for the smelters in Queensland, and whether it could be replicated in New South Wales?
We hope so, but look, first of all, we're not there yet. The easy part in a way is to sign up for the renewable energy. The more complex part is to get the firming so that you have a network where you can be sure of that you have electricity 24/7, because aluminium production requires that. And we're working very closely with the Queensland government to come up with a solution. And only when we have that and know that the all-in cost is competitive, then we know that we have a really great future for our smelter. If we can get that done for Boyne Smelter, we'll do everything we can for the smelter in New South Wales, Tomago.
What happens to scope 3 emissions? Does the industry have a solution for that yet?
It's very difficult, but it's not that nobody looks after it, because my scope 3 emissions are, of course, my customers' scope 1 and 2. So if every company on the planet is just focusing on addressing their scope 1 and 2, then all emissions would be solved. But we do feel a moral responsibility to try to help our customers, in this case mainly when we produce iron ore to steelmakers have a lot of CO2 emissions, and we're doing a number of things. So, for example, you will have seen here in this quarter that we have announced making a big demo plant of what is called bio-iron, where we can produce steel at a much lower CO2 content. So we are working research and development and small-scale plants to try to find the future way of making steel. We do that hand in hand with the steel makers.
On Future Made in Australia, BHP's Mike Henry has reportedly criticised the government's approach. What do you think about it?
We're not politicians, and it's for politicians to formulate policies for what is right in Australia. I note that Canada, the US and Europe have already done similar things. So I'm not surprised to see the initiative in Australia. We have a very strong mining industry that stands very well on its own feet, but Australia has got a somewhat weaker manufacturing industry. And we have got some of the biggest manufacturing assets in terms of our aluminium industry, and it's quite important to work hand in hand with the government and have an industry policy to say how can we make sure that manufacturing is competitive also in Australia.
As deglobalisation really takes hold, how does a global operation like yours continue to operate globally?
I think there's more need than ever for having global companies, even in a period where you've got a lot of geopolitical tension. And I still hope and believe that trade is a good thing, not just economically, but it's also something that de-escalate tensions between countries, because ultimately trade is between people, and it requires that you get to know each other and find common ground. So I still think that it's a force of good, and particularly something like mining. There's different geology in different locations, and there's different consumer demand in different locations. So there will always be a need for international trade when it comes to mined products.
Do you find you and your colleagues are becoming more diplomats these days?
I don't know whether the word is diplomats, but we cannot just do things on our own on a transactional basis. It is important to understand the needs for not just the local societies where we work, but also societies at large, and therefore engagement with key stakeholders are critical. And if you can be effective in that, you are supporting your own business development.
And of course, the business that you operate is very complex, and the global economy is becoming more complex. Is there anything that you could single out, or a few things that you could single out that really keep you awake at night?
Well, the key thing is, first of all, my priority number 1 and 2 and 3 will always be the Rio Tinto operations, and safety is the very first thing. So making sure that we have an environment that is safe for every employee is absolutely critical, and having operational stability, having good project execution, those are the things that, it doesn't keep me awake at night, but it will always be my top priority. But it's equally important. Ultimately, companies exist for their customers. So it's important to have that international part right, and also work with the host governments, both on the consuming side and on the producing side.
And shareholders?
Yeah, that's interesting that I haven't mentioned the shareholders, because I firmly believe that if you get those things right, you actually optimize the return to the shareholders.
Jakob Stausholm, thank you so much.
Thank you.